Hello, welcome and good afternoon to this webinar here at Fronius International. Today we want to take a closer look at our new hybrid inverter, the Fronius GEN24 Plus. I'm very happy to announce that we now have launched the sale of this product, at least in some countries. So from Monday on this week, the wholesalers are already selling our SIMO, our three-phase GEN24 Plus inverter, followed by the Primo in the beginning of next year. So not long to wait, and also the single-phase market hybrid inverter will be launched. So before we get into the agenda, what we talk about today, I quickly want to introduce the team. It consists of my colleague Michael Raunig and myself, Christoph Schierlinger. We are both in team trainings and education at Fronius International in the solar energy division. And my colleague Michael Raunig is actually responsible for the chat today. So here my first, please, if you have any question during or after the webinar, use the chat function on the right side of your screen. You will send the question directly to Michael, and he's answering then as fast as possible to provide you then with the answer. And I myself will guide you through this webinar through the next 40 to 45 minutes. And now let's head on to the agenda. So as I mentioned, what we want to talk about is the new GEN24 Plus inverter. We mainly talk about main features of the new product, why we designed it the way it is. Also a few technical details like the planning flexibility, a few input data, and what makes it so easy in terms of installation and commissioning. And last but not least, also regarding service, we talk a little bit. Okay, then let's move on with the first big question. Why did we design the product the way it is? Of course, we took in consideration the wantings of the customers themselves. And what does the customer want? It's of course a few things. First of all, he wants to have the ability to provide green energy for his home, green energy future, more or less, which is of course the basic function of our inverter. We can provide that for sure. The customer is able to provide his home with own produced solar energy and even more, like we can see now. Second thing, maximum self-consumption. Of course, it's very good to have a high self-consumption, especially in most of the countries where we don't have such a good feed-in tariff. It's much more efficient, much more wantable to have a high self-consumption. And it's of course also possible to do it with the GEN24 inverter in terms of adding new components, adding new devices for storing energy to increase the self-consumption. For example, a battery can be connected. You can do hot water generation with your own pallet and more and more. Next up, what's important for the customer is to use the energy at a later stage. Of course, a few of the homeowners are not at home during the day, they are at work, so therefore they don't have such a high self-consumption. With a battery, which can be connected to the GEN24 inverter, they can store the surplus energy during the day or preserve it in terms of hot water and use it at a later stage during the night and so on. Next up, there is a matter of energy independency, not only when it comes to a blackout scenario, but also in terms of being independent from the grid. Both is possible when we add a battery to it, because we can have a backup solution with the battery, and also we can raise the autarky level by storing the energy during the day, refueling the battery more or less, and using the energy during the night then. Next big topic for the customer is to use it for to use their own energy for mobility. That's of course another big point in the future, to integrate mobility into our daily energy decision. And therefore, of course, the e-mobility comes into play. And with the GEN24, we can add wall boxes, we can control diverse wall boxes to charge up our electric vehicle also with surplus energy of our PV system. And last but not least, there is also the possibility to add this whole solution with the GEN24 into a existing smart home system, for example. And in general, it's a smart system overall. So with the GEN24 as head of the system, we can do so many things like we can see in the next few slides then. So all of these things are possible with our new device, with the GEN24 Plus. And as I mentioned, we have two systems with that, a single phase and a three phase. Quickly want to show you the differences. Therefore, they look the same, only the size is a little bit different. That's because we start with the single phase Primo GEN24 Plus at a lower power class from 3 to 6 kilowatt. And with the Cymer, which is now released and now launched since Monday, we have a higher power class from 6, 8, and 10 kilowatt on the AC side. Both of the devices have two independently working PP trackers, so we are very uniquely versatile when it comes to system design, and we have an independent single battery input capable of 22 amps to charge and discharge the battery at a very high power. So now when it comes to the customer wantings, we talked about the green energy future. That's of course the basic function we can supply with our inverter. It's functioning like a simple inverter. It's a reliable basic system which can of course be installed also for customers who are not sure if they want to have a battery installed. Maybe in the future they want, but not right now. So they are perfectly fine with installing this device with a smart meter, for example, at the feed-in point. And then in the future, they can have their energy transition. They can add another component, the battery, an ohm pilot, and they're perfectly fine. They can do that to reduce their energy costs, of course, to also have expansion possibilities, as I mentioned. And overall, it's a high quality product made in Austria. Every inverter from us is made in Austria. And also we can offer a really good support. That's also a thing I have to say here. Really good support here for our devices. Next up, I want to talk about the efficient energy management, which is also possible with the device. Energy flow management is the term we want to use here. And it's, of course, a very crucial part here to have a Fronius smart meter installed within the system. It's pictured here at the bottom right here. This is a Fronius smart meter, and we want that basically in every system installed with our inverters, because it's the perfect basis for whatever the customer wants to do. Even if they don't want to have an expansion in a few years, they still have the perfect overview of the and the visualization of every energy flow within the system on Fronius SOLAR.WEB if the Fronius smart meter is installed. And when we have energy management, we of course also need this device, because then the inverter knows, okay, how much surplus energy do we have in the system, and do we have to switch on a load which is connected to the inverter. We can of course do a load profile analysis, as I mentioned, when we have the smart meter installed, and the load management. That's when we want to switch on, switch off some devices, some loads we want to at a certain threshold, surplus threshold. And all of these settings lead to a maximum self-consumption, of course. Yeah, this maximum self-consumption is possible in a few ways. Let's say one of it is to have installed a hot water generation system. This is possible with the Fronius Ohmpalot, pictured in the bottom right here again. This device is overall a power regulator, which is only using surplus energy coming from the inverter to generate hot water. So we can connect to this device a heating rod, which is placed in the boiler, and it's only using the surplus energy then to heat up the water in the boiler for our hot water use. We can even integrate it into our heating system if we want to. And with this heating rod in the boiler, with this maximizing in self-consumption, we of course have a very efficient way to store our surplus energy. So therefore we increase the own consumption, we are not feeding into the grid, and we use it at the later stage when the customer comes home in the night. He then can shower, he can take the hot water back again. Yeah, and the other way to increase the self-consumption is of course with a battery. And the GEN24 is it's not the only solution for a customer who wants a battery. As I mentioned, also customers without battery can install the GEN24 to maybe add it later on. And with a battery connection, we can add here a BYD battery, the new one, the premium battery from BYD. Both systems are possible, the HVS and the HVM. I will show you in the next slide what's the difference here. It's a very easy retrofit solution. So again, also for customers who want to add the battery later on, it's very easy to assess this. And of course, we increase the self-consumption massively by charging the battery during the day with surplus energy and using it in night times, or also in a backup scenario. And high powers are possible here for loading, for charging and discharging the battery, up to 9 kilowatt actually. So now the promised slide with a little bit of detail on the BYD battery solution. So what are we talking about here? It's actually a very secure battery solution here. We talk about the lithium iron phosphate technology, one of the safest on the market right now, not also because of the cell chemistry, but also because we have a stationary battery with a battery management system here on top. This is the gray box. So it's also thermal management in terms of security then. Yeah, it's a modular system, and now it comes to the difference. Do the customer want a HVS or a HVM? The difference is actually HVS stands for high voltage small cell battery, and HVM high voltage medium cell battery. The difference is then with the HVS we have a small cell capacity, let's say, but with a high voltage. And quite the opposite with the HVM, we have a little bit lower, a little bit higher cell capacity, but with a lower cell voltage. And that's what we can see here with the HVS. We can go up to 4 modules with the HVS and get 10.2 kilowatt hour maximum. With the HVM, up to 22 kilowatt hours is possible with up to 8 modules. The difference is then the cell voltage. And of course, both of these systems are retrofittable. So in BYD is giving out the information that you can at any time add, of course, another module. So if the customer says that the capacity is too low, we have to add another module, you can always add another module, but please be sure to not mix HVS and HVM, of course, because of the different voltages. Yeah, and overall, it's an easy installation. It's a ground mount installation. You just place the bottom part and then stack the battery modules onto each other, fix it with 2 screws on each end, and on the very top, we have the battery management units then. And then It's a very easy commissioning also. BYD created an app to do that. It's very straightforward and very easy to do. Yeah, and with a battery connected, with a BYD battery connected, it's also possible to recharge the battery then in a backup scenario. So like pictured here, if the grid, if the grid would be failing here on the right side, it's still possible to recharge the battery from, of course, if the sun is shining, we would be able to recharge the battery also in a backup mode. And also, of course, supply our loads from the battery or from the PV modules. Yeah, and also what's possible with this solution is if we have a GEN24 inverter installed here with modules connected to it, and also at the bottom here a BYD battery, and we would have another older version of inverter in the system, we would be able to load the battery with the existing PV system. That's also possible to add another AC charging, for example, and this is possible, of course, because we have a smart meter installed at the feed-in point, and this indicates, of course, if we have surplus energy from this device, for example, it's cutting then this amount of surplus energy we have and recharging the battery. So a second charging with a second existing PV system is possible with the GEN24. Yeah, regarding multi-flow technology, it basically symbolizes the things we've just said. So the main thing the inverter does is keeping the smart meter at the feed-in point at 0. We don't want to feed in the surplus energy, and we don't want to consume energy from the grid. And therefore, it's constantly checking how much energy do we need in the household and what's available from the PV generator. And if it's not enough, we take it out of the battery. If it's more than enough coming from the PV generator, it's recharging the battery. That's the basic function of the inverter explained, and we call it the multi-flow technology. Yeah, and again, here we would symbolize if there is a second inverter installed, we would be able to recharge also the battery from this second inverter. Yeah, now in terms of safety, in case of a grid outage, it's also possible to have solution with the GEN24 Plus inverter, and actually there are two ways to do so. It's of course a matter of energy independency. As I mentioned, the customer not only wants to be able to supply the household during the grid outage, but also by adding the battery, he increases the self-consumption and the autarky level. And everything is integrated as standard. The connection compartment is all ready to go. And also the basic backup power connection is ready. Of course, the switching components at the feed-in point of the household need to be installed. And then there is the possibility to have a PV point installed. And now I want to tell you more about the PV point. The PV point is basically a basic grid backup already installed or already available with the overall package of the GEN24 inverter. It's integrated as standard and on board the GEN24, and it's a single phase outlet where you can connect a cable to a wall socket, for example, like here pictured. And this outlet, this PV point, is only supplied in grid outage, and it's an automatic reconnection. So if the grid fails, it's automatically, with a few seconds delay, switching on to this PV point. And this PV point is then supplied if we have connected a battery or if the sun is shining, of course. So if there is any case of power supply from the GEN24 inverter, it's supplying this PV point then, without any expensive switching components at the feed-in point this is already integrated and ready to go for the customer. The only things needed is a cable from the PV point to a socket. And of course, we recommend to have here an RCD integrated socket just for safety reasons. Yeah, when it comes to the electric loads, it's possible to fire up a nominal 3 kilowatt for this PV point, single phase, of course, and of course also maximum we can overcharge it with 4.1 kilowatt. So it's perfect for recharging a mobile device, the laptop, to plug in a light or something, or the freezer, something like that. Yeah, and as I mentioned, it's an easy installation, very straightforward, no additional components other than I just mentioned necessary, no expensive components necessary. Yeah, and the expensive version of this, let's say, would be the maximum backup power, the full backup. So in this case, the whole household would be supplied with power again in case of a grid outage with three-phase backup power. This is, of course, possible to do so. It's necessary to have then the switching components installed at the feed-in point and connected. Also there, please be aware of the automatic switch over time of about 60 to 90 seconds. So it's not without delay. The same thing on the PV point. And electric loads can be connected here, single phase or three phase, doesn't matter in this case. And in this case, of course, we would have a maximum energy availability. Yeah, taking a step forward, we now want to take a look at the third party connection possibilities and also e-mobility, because it's becoming a major role more and more in the future, of course. And as I mentioned, more and more customers want to integrate the mobility sector into their energy decision. We have a variety of open interfaces with this device, as we had with the previous Snap Inverter series, and which allows a very easy integration actually. For example, home automation systems can be integrated here, or the GEN24 can be integrated into those home automation systems. Also, different EV charging stations can be switched by our inverter. So we just lay a control cable, or at least can be signaled, okay, now we have surplus energy, please switch on the charging of the electric vehicle. And more heat pump manufacturers have such smart grid ready features, which allows the inverter to control the heat pump if surplus is available, to switch on the pump if a certain threshold is stepped over, and to switch off if we go beneath the threshold. Yeah, just to sum it up a little bit regarding the open interfaces, all the communication is of course on board as standard. LAN connection, Wi-Fi connection is of course possible. We have Modbus RTU for Fronius components. So if a battery would be connected like that, a smart meter, ohm pallet, and so on. And also Modbus TCP connection is possible. So to providing the data for a third-party unit, for example. We also have the possibility to control digital in and outputs. That's what we talk about when we talk about energy management, so load management. With these digital outputs, we have a 12-volt DC signal where we can control a relay, and where we can, for example, switch on a pump, a pool pump, heat pump, switch on a wall box for the electric vehicle, and so on. So different kinds of loads can be switched on or off with this digital in and output. And last but not least, Fronius Solar API with the JSON protocol also to getting out data from the Fronius inverter to add it on another surface, for example. Yeah, let's quickly go over the easy and flexible planning, which is possible with our new inverter. So as we have heard, the new GEN24 Plus inverter comes in 3 power classes, 6, 8, and 10 kilowatt. And the reason why it's so easy to plan with and so flexible is because we have a very broad voltage range. Okay, it's pictured here below. It's a very broad voltage range, which allows us to even realize strings with 3 modules upwards. The maximum DC voltage is kind of the same like with the previous snap inverters, 1000 volts DC maximum, and the MPP tracker voltage range where we can operate within is 80 to 800 volts DC. So therefore, from 3 modules on, we can ensure that the inverter is running. As I mentioned, we have 2 individual working MPP trackers, so also east-west installations are no problem, but please be sure to consider the 2 different input currents, 25 amps on the first one, 12.5 on the second one, and 1 battery input capable of 22 amps. What's also possible with this device is oversizing it on the DC side. So with a 10 kV device, so a GEN24 Plus 10, we would be able to connect up to 15 kilowatt peak on this device without harming the warranty, without getting any risk of damage whatsoever. Of course, we wouldn't get out more than 10 kilowatt on the AC side, but when we think about the east-west installation, for example, it would be the perfect solution to oversize the system because we never ever get the full nominal power out of both systems on the each orientations at the same time. So therefore, it does make sense to oversize it a little bit, and that's no problem for the GEN24 Plus inverter. Yeah, maximum yield despite partial shading. Of course, shading cannot always be avoided, especially light to medium shading or partial shading like it's mentioned here. And also with our new GEN24 hybrid inverter, we have a solution for that. It's called the Dynamic Peak Manager, and it's basically a shadow management. It's an algorithm which is constantly checking the voltage current curve to examine it for the perfect optimum power point to run on. So even with shading, we have low losses and we can operate at the highest possible output power. And the reason why we picture it here, of course, is also because we can use this instead of optimizers on most roofs, because if we talk about low or medium shading, partial shading, and not heavy shading over the whole day, over the whole array, it's no problem. And we can save a little bit money because standard modules are cheaper than those with the optimizers on. And there is no additional electronic on the roof. It's simple as that, and it's working with the Dynamic Peak Manager. Yeah, it's also best performing in different temperature ranges. So despite heat, we can get the best out of this device. And that's because a known technology, Fronius is using the active cooling technology. We can see it very clearly at the front of the GEN24. We have this big fan, which is getting rid of the hot air, because as we know, hot air is not good for, or heat is not good for any electronic component, so we need to cool it down, which of course allows us to have a longer lifespan of our components, of our inverter, and we also have more yield. Because when we compare it with a passively cooled system, they have to regulate down quite fast, quite heavy if it comes to heat. So they have to reduce the output power because the module component, that the components are not capable to do so in a strong heat. So with the active cooling technology, we are not running risk in cutting down the yield. Of course, it's also less weight because there is no big heavy cooling ribs, and it's more flexible and easier to install because it's not so heavy, not so bulky, and therefore easier. Now we want to take a closer look at the easy and fast installation with our new inverter. And it starts with a very similar picture than with our snap inverters. For those of you who know our snap inverters, it's a simply light wall bracket, which we have to mount. The difference is that we have no active components on this wall bracket now. It's no connection compartment. It's just aluminum that we need to fix on the wall. And when we've done that, we can then snap in, we can hang it in the actual device, the power unit. It's making a very obvious clicking sound. Then we need to get rid of the bottom cover. We need to unscrew the .com cover, let's say. And that's also very fast to do because of 180 degrees quick locking screws. It's a simple Torx 20 screw, but with a quick locking mechanism. So half a turn and it's open. Only 5 of those screws secured this compartment, but that's more than enough. So we are very fast to get into the connection compartment of the inverter. So it's also relevant for servicing, of course. And when we open it and see in the connection compartment, we can see the next new item. It's the spring lever connection. So there is also no screwing needed also for connecting the cable to the inverter itself. We just put the cable, put it in and close the lever, the spring connection. There is no torque issue anymore, no tool needed. And then we plug the whole connection terminal into the device itself and we're finished. So it's really a rapid, fast installation and also a rapid service possible with this device. If we have done that, there is the next step of commissioning the whole thing, of course. And by commissioning the whole thing, we have now added another new feature. It's our new commissioning app. It's called Solar.start. So if you're interested, since Monday, it's available on Apple devices and on all Android-based devices. You can download it. We are very happy also to get your feedback on those stores. Check it out. Solar.start app is it called, Fronius Solar.start. And with this app, we can commission also the new GEN24 inverter, but not only that, also the previous snap inverters can be installed, can be commissioned with this app. And it's functioning like that on the GEN24 inverter. We have 3 easy steps, also very usable, very user-friendly made. I quickly want to describe it on this screenshot here. So the first step would be the network connection. We want to connect the inverter. So if the customer wants it, we can connect the inverter to the local network. Next up, of course, necessary is the product setting. So the grid code and so on, everything can be set on this part. And the third and last step would be, if we have a network connection, to integrate it into SOLAR.WEB, the whole system. By doing so, the customer has the whole visibility, the whole monitoring options available, and the installer, of course, also has service benefits. Yeah. Also, a very cool feature is with our new app, we have an automatic Wi-Fi connection. So if we have the Solar.start open, and if we start the Wi-Fi access point on our device, it's just one click on the GEN24 inverter, and the Wi-Fi connection is open. Then the Solar.start app is automatically searching for this and connecting to this. So also very convenient. So in overall, it's one of the easiest commissioning on the market right now with this Solar.start app with our GEN24 inverter. I already mentioned it, SOLAR.WEB. Maybe some of you already know this tool. It's our online portal. And with SOLAR.WEB, we have here a slogan, think online, decrease costs. The SOLAR.WEB is, of course, a very cool feature for the customer itself, because he can see, he can overlook the whole system, he can do a monitoring, how much do I need? If we have installed a Fronius smart meter, he can even see his demand from the grid. And when it comes to the installer, please think about it. It's also a very cool tool to have a upselling tool with this one. So it's a financial success for every installer to use SOLAR.WEB for customer sales conversation. It should not be just to sell the PV system, to install the inverter and then be gone, but you can of course do also a contract with your customer. You can say, okay, in a year or in 2 years, I come back to you, we do a quick overlook, we do a monitoring of the system, just looking if everything is running right. And then you can also say, for your system, a own pallet would be a perfect solution. You would have a high increase in self-consumption, or what do you say to a battery connection, for example. So it's an upselling factor, which also makes the SOLAR.WEB very useful. The second thing would be the remote troubleshooting. We can do a performance check, of course, online by comparing different PV systems to each other. And we can also see if there is a state code, an error arising. The customer can send this to the installer, or maybe the installer already has received this service code, and then he can remotely do a troubleshooting, maybe contacting the hotline of Fronius, ordering a spare part, and then do a single trip to site, a single trip to the customer instead of multiple ones. So also for troubleshooting, it's possible to do with this tool. Always up to date. Of course, another big topic, you can do easy remote updates just by one click. If Fronius is mentioning there is a new tool with new features, a new update with new features available, then you can do it by one click. And it's also, of course, a regular software updates maintain the warranty service for the new GEN24 Plus inverter, which makes it even more interesting to do it from the office via one click. And last but not least, we can minimize time and costs because it's a fast and more efficient technical support with the SOLAR.WEB. Yeah, and now, last but not least, let's take a closer look onto the service. So the big questions, of course, are always what is serviceable, what makes it serviceable. So we have seen a few things that considers the whole device as one of the fastest serviceable devices on the market. For example, the quick locking screws or the spring clamp termination inside with the cables. And of course, we can do also a component exchange with this device. It's not that we can do a print board exchange like on the Snap inverter. That's not possible anymore. But as we can see on this explosion drawing here, every cover can be exchanged, every data communication card, the wall mounting and so on, and also this power unit here. This power unit itself can be also exchanged, but not a single print. The power unit itself, the print board, is installed behind this fan here actually, and it cannot be accessed. So if you want to exchange the whole power unit, this is perfectly fine to do with this, what we can see here. Also automatic notifications, like I mentioned, if it's online, if it's on SOLAR.WEB, you as installer can check in yourself and get your notifications. If something is wrong, You can be notified if you want, or the customer. We already mentioned the troubleshooting, which is possible. And of course, the one trip to site, very, very big topic, especially if it's an installer who travels far distances to install the systems. This can be very crucial. Easy accessible connection area. As I mentioned, quick locking screws allow a fast opening of the cover. And all in all, we have a very fast solution, which is of course also satisfies the customer because we have a very low downtime then. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, this is it. This is actually the GEN24 Plus and what is making it so uniquely versatile. So it's an all-in-one solution. And now I am very happy to say it's now available on the market, at least the SIMO, the three-phase one. From Monday on, you should be able to get it via wholesaler. Maybe, of course, a little bit waiting time is still needed because the demand is very high, but it's starting to sell. We are constantly increasing the production. And yeah, so at this point, I want to say thank you very much for joining in today for this webinar. I now want to focus on the comments you have made, and therefore I quickly want to mute myself to turn off the microphone and be fully available again together with Michael for your questions if there are any. And so we won't close the webinar, we just mute ourselves and you are still able to send us in your questions. So at this point, thank you very much for listening and hopefully see you next time then.